downloading Transformative Principal podcast. Today is our second part of the interview with Bernardo Villar at Bayview Elementary in Layton, Utah. This is a great interview also where we learn about how to establish great communication with parents, and we learn about the great things that he has in his office and what makes him sensitive to multicultural needs at his school. Once again, I'd like to thank my sponsor, Paperless Principal. Please go to paperlessprincipal.com to learn how you can be a more efficient principal and streamline your workflow.
So what are some other things that you think set your school apart from other schools? Things that you've done that you've implemented that are amazing?
I don't know about amazing, but other things that we've done and we've implemented. I think, well, if we looked at it, we look at the academics that we've implemented, and also one of the things is parent involvement, is making sure that we are communicating with parents all the time. That's one piece that is so important. And I've even had parents call me from other schools that I've left and said, "Thank you so much. I just want you to know the communication that you gave to us I don't have it now." And I feel like I never realized how wonderful it was. But actually, I had a mom call me the other day, and she says, "I have a question." And I said, "What's your question?" And she said, "Well, Dr. Villar, I just was wondering," she said, "when something would happen at school, you would call me and let me know what happened. Is that something you do, or is that a have to throughout the district?" And I says, "Well, actually, it's just something that I do. I always feel that it's better that the parent understand what occurred at school or what issues are happening with their child, because I know as a parent, I would like to want to know what's happening with my kid." Mm-hmm. And so she says, "Okay, I was just wondering because now I get everything secondhand, and it's kind of hard. And so I just want you to know that I appreciate that. I appreciate that you were able to let me to inform me of things that were happening." I think one of the other things, I received a letter the other day, and I have it there in my folder, and it just talks about the importance of making sure that the staff understands how valuable they are. Mm-hmm. And I had a parent write and tell me that how wonderful it was that they were able to communicate with the staff. She said, "Before you came to the school, I never had that opportunity to really just say that I could just call and figure things out, that if I couldn't talk to the teacher, I could talk to you. You would connect us with a time, and now I'm able to do that." And she says, "I just want you to know that piece for me alone is just wonderful, because now I feel I could just, communicate one way or another, and be able to communicate with other staff members."
Right. So what are the ways that you do communicate with parents? 'Cause calling every single parent is difficult, to say the least.
Yeah, but we have a call-out system. Okay. But we do call. If there's an incident with a child, it doesn't matter.
Absolutely.
It has to be called. And that would be myself, the assistant, the secretary, the assistant to the secretary, all of those staff people. We all make sure that there is a connection with the parent. What we do is we have a call-out system, and it will call every parent when we have other things happening within the school. We have a newsletter that goes out. We have the marquee that goes up. We also have the assistant here at Bayview's incredible. Mm-hmm. Ms. Rigby. Ms. Rigby does a phenomenal job, and she has it set up on Twitter. She has it set up on Facebook, and so she also has a 101 connection where they are able to, when we send out a message, it also will go out to their cell phones. So,
okay. So, a lot of schools have call-out systems, and a lot of schools have marquees and newsletters. But obviously, you're doing something that is making a difference, where people are recognizing that communication more than, say, another school. But you're doing something more for people to call you and say, "I miss your communication." So that may be hard to put your finger on that.
I think it might be just the personal phone call from the principal, because it's not always. I don't always just make the bad phone calls, because if a child the other day was doing some great things, I will call the mom and say, "This, guess what happened today? This is what happened, and I just want you to know he did really well, and this is what he did, and so I just wanted to share that with you." And I think that's a piece that's important, because too many times we just focus on what happened in the negative, and sometimes we don't acknowledge all that positive. And so I think that's an important piece.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that is probably what is making a real difference. So how often would you say you make those positive phone calls compared to the negative phone calls?
I think probably the phone calls with themselves are just like 2 or 3 times a week, but there's always the connection after school, because I'm out there. Right. And so there's always the connection that I will look for a parent. I will look for a parent and say, this is what, I look for a parent and I'll say, oh, guess what your kid did today? Or this is what I saw today. And one thing that I make sure is that I know every child's name in the school, that I could remember every child's name. And that's really important to me, to make sure that those children know that I know who they are.
Right. So how do you do that?
You know what? I really am not sure. It was when I first became a teacher at a high school, because I was a high school teacher. Then I became an assistant principal in high school, and I could remember over 1,800 names in that high school. Wow. And I do not know how I did that. I just, as I have got older, I do have to relate their names to something sometimes, because some of the names are a little different. So then I have to relate their names to something different so that I could remember who they are. But I try to make sure I memorize every child's name.
And then do you just say it to them whenever you see them?
Like in the morning, I will walk by in the morning and I will individually call them by name and say good morning to each one of them and make sure that they hear their name. So sometimes I'll go out on the playground. Like today, I spent 2 times out on the playground, making sure the kids saw me, making sure they all knew that I knew their names.
That's really great. I think the positive contact with parents and knowing each of the kids' names are 2 things that are incredibly valuable and vital to having a positive culture at the school. So by what point do you memorize would you say you memorize all the students' names? Is that the first 2 weeks of school, first 2 months of school?
It probably takes me a couple of months, but I go by in each classroom and I starting meeting the kids and memorizing their names. But by the following year, like last year was a bigger challenge than this year, because last year I memorized, 80% of their names, and the new kids, then I just have the new kids coming in. Right. And so it's like the new kindergartners, I start to remember who all they are. And so when they're passing off reading or something, I go listen, and then I ask them their names right away, and so that I could acknowledge who they are.
That's great. So your teachers that I talked to before also mentioned that your parent involvement was phenomenal. They said that they felt that as well, and that involving the community and make sure they all know what is going on, they recognize that as a great strength of yours as well. So tell me about do you have a PTA here that you work with as well?
We have a PTA.
And tell me about your relationship with them and how you get things done through them.
One of the things is the PTA has to understand they're important and vital part of our school. And so I'm very proactive in making sure that wherever I am, I recognize the PTA. We'll be having this huge program, Christmas program, this Friday. So in that program, when I begin, the first thing I do is acknowledge all the parents, acknowledge the parents' volunteers. I acknowledge the parents themselves just for allowing us and giving us the opportunity to teach their children. That's an important piece. I also do it in both languages, so that when I'm speaking with parents, I use 2 languages many times. so that they understand that, they're an important piece of this whole process. They're a very important piece of this process. I go out and I greet the parents. I try to remember who they are as well. But a lot of times I'll say, "Oh, hi, David's mom," or "Hi, Junior's dad." So, but they know that I know who they are connected to, and I think they realize, "Oh, he knows my child."
That's really great. A lot of schools that are Title I schools have a problem with behavior and discipline at the school. Can you talk a little bit about that and how you deal with that? I imagine that your positive communication and knowing all the kids' names certainly helps. So talk.
It changes, yeah. One of the things also that's very important is that as the school, we all have the same program. We all look at it together and we say, we get together as a school and we say, this is what we want to do. This is what we see happening, so that everybody is on the same page. We're not all on different pages of discipline. We're all working towards the same goal and the same form of discipline. But our discipline's a little different at this school, because if you walk down the hall and I see a child that's not behaving, the first thing I do is acknowledge the child that is behaving. So I will turn around and say, "Oh my gosh, Johnny, thank you for folding your arms and thank you for how you're walking so well." And the next thing you know, the child that is misbehaving right away will jump into line. So we want to acknowledge all of the positives. I have a class that's walking perfectly quiet and down the hall because other classes are going on. I acknowledge the class right away, and I will say, "Whose class is this?" And they'll say, "Oh, it's Miss Reese's class." "Mrs. Reese, you have the most wonderful students ever. This is what I love to see." One of the assistant superintendents came through my school, and as she was walking through, she goes, "Oh my gosh." She says, "I feel like I'm at a private school. The way everybody is so well-mannered and so behaved." She says, "I was raised in a Catholic school, and everybody had to be quiet constantly." She goes, "I feel like I'm in that same environment because everybody just walks so quietly down the halls, so well-mannered." She says, "This is incredible." But I think it's, again, focusing on that positive, focusing on what the positive kids and what is happening, and it turns kids around.
Yeah, for sure. That's really great. So the last question I like to ask everybody, well, there are two questions. The first one is, what's something that a principal who's going to be listening to this later, what's something that they can do starting today to make themselves into a transformative principal?
I think one of the things is acknowledging and looking at ourselves. I think one of the things principal needs to look back and say, okay, where do I need help in? And what is my purpose and my goal? Why did I get into this profession? What was my ultimate reason for getting in to be a principal? Was it to make things better? Or was it just to guide things? Or what was it? And my whole goal, and as I share with my staff, the first opening day always is, I feel like this is a very, very important position. To be an educator is one of the most important things that you could do in your life. And if you do not have your heart into this, then you need to rethink that. Because as I grew up, and I grew up in the Title I environment, I grew up as a Title I child. One of the things that as I grew up, everything that I learned came from a different teacher. And we are here to make a difference. And as an administrator, you have to look at yourself and say, why am I here? And what is the difference that I want to make? What impact do I want to leave on these children? And I think I look back at my teachers and I look at Mrs. Tucker, incredible teacher. She had so much love and so much passion for us to learn. Then I had another third grade teacher that was so ornery and mean, and I thought, I never want to be that type of teacher. This is the type of teacher I want to be. Then I look at other administrators that I've worked with, or like I had a high school teacher, phenomenal, Miss Johnson, an amazing lady. She shared her travels with me. She shared what she did to get an education. So it just enlightened me, want to be more educated, to go on. And so the whole thing is I think we have to look at and say, what is our whole reason? What is our whole purpose? And what do I want to accomplish in this environment? Mm-hmm. What do I want? For me, what I want is I want these children to have the best education that they can have and be as successful as they could be and go on and make changes in the world. An educator changed my life by what they had said and what they had done. I want us all to do that for every child, and that's what my passion is. And so I would say, look and see, why are you doing this?
Mm-hmm. Figure out what that is, and then do
what you need to do to get there.
Exactly. That's really powerful. The other question that I like to ask is I like to look around your office and see something unique that's in here or something that is not up in every principal's office. So I notice you've got an African rain stick over there. And is this an African mask?
Those are actually Mayan masks.
Mayan masks, excuse me. They're behind me. So tell me a little bit about why you've got these decorations in your office.
Well, if you'll notice, there's different cultures in the whole thing. And I think one of the most important thing is cultural diversity and the acceptance of understanding and knowing each other's backgrounds. And that's one of the things that I work with all my teachers as well, is understanding we all have different cultural differences, and we need to be able to understand and embrace those differences so that once we embrace them, the children could understand things as well. And so if you see the Mayans mask came from the Yucatan, and so being there, the kids come and see those. And so that's part of my heritage and part of my culture. One of the things as I grew up, you'll see the American part of my culture, which is the Dick and Jane. And so the Dick and Jane prints, these are from a original book that was Dick and Jane. And so they were bound. You'll see the rain stick. You'll see different cultural books. And one of my books that I read to the kids all the time is The Difference in the World. We're all different, but we're all the same as well. And so that's a book that I read to almost every grade level that I go through. But basically everything in here is so that children could relate to it.
That's really neat. And that's why I asked that question, because there's a reason why principals put things up in their offices. And what I'm learning is that it's not always for the principal, but to make sure that the kids have another reinforcement about why they should feel safe and comfortable in that environment, as you've shown very expertly today. So
thank you.
Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank
this
you.
Has been very informative.
Thanks for tuning in to Transformative Principal today. If you'd like to learn more about what we're doing, please follow me on Twitter @JethroJones. Or if you have questions or know someone who would be a great transformative principal for me to interview, please send me an email at jethrojones@gmail.com.